Today's episode is sponsored by Bandada, a quick 1 to 2 player game in which players travel the world photographing exotic birds. Players draft cards to manipulate dice, but then use those same cards at the end of the round to score points. And the cards you scored in round 1 will still be scoring points in rounds 2, 3, and 4. Can you manage the complexity as your tableau of birds increases? Compete against a friend or play through 10 unique solo scenarios. Bandada is on Kickstarter until March 11th, so be sure to check it out right now. And if you're looking for a partner to help you with marketing, I recommend you reach out to Andrew Lowen at Next Level Web. In the last year, Andrew and his company have helped board game creators raise more than $2 million on Kickstarter, and 91% of those campaigns funded in the first 24 hours, and 74% of those campaigns were from first-time creators. They have a system that works and offers solutions ranging from helping you build ads for your project all the way to fully managing your marketing campaign. So if you're looking for a reliable marketing partner for your upcoming campaign, visit nextlevelweb.com/Kickstarter and fill out a contact form.
Hosting for the Board Game Design Lab podcast is sponsored by Quartermaster Logistics, the leader in crowdfunding fulfillment and warehousing. Check them out at qmlogistics.com. Welcome to the Board Game Design Lab podcast, a proud member of the Dice Tower Network. Each week, we want to bring you an insightful interview on a specific topic in board game design to help you design and create games people love. And now, here's your host, Gabe Barrett.
What's up, my friends? Welcome to the Board Game Design Lab. Today, we're going big. We're talking about what does it look like to design big games, massive games, enormous, humongous, gigantic in scope games. And we're talking to Isaac Childress from Cephalofair Games. Isaac, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Really excited to talk to you, especially about this topic. I don't know of anyone else on the planet that I'd rather talk to about this particular topic when it comes to really big games. You've designed several. You've designed some massive in-scope games, 25-pound games that come with lots of boxes and envelopes and cards and miniatures and just a crazy amount of content in the box. So I'm just really pumped to pick your brain about how do you do this? How do you create one of these games and actually finish? How do you design one of these games and hype it up and get people excited to buy a 25-pound, $100 game? What does that look like? How do you set up your timelines? All that good stuff. But before we get into it, who are you? How'd you get into game design? All that kind of thing.
Right. So yeah, Isaac Childress. I don't know. I guess I got into game design about 10 years ago or so. I've just been playing board games on and off before that, but that was really sort of when I started going to like a weekly group and just really started just absorbing everything around me, board game related. And I don't know, it just naturally led to sort of starting to design my own games. And so the first game I designed was Forge War, and I just kind of put it up on Kickstarter to see what would happen, and it ended up doing really well. And so from there, I decided to keep going with the game design thing, and published Gloomhaven after that, and I guess the rest is history.
Yeah, the rest is history in that you just recently did Frosthaven on Kickstarter, which became the highest grossing game in Kickstarter history, or board game in Kickstarter history. So congratulations on that. And from what you tell me, Frosthaven is about 50% bigger than Gloomhaven, which blows my mind. The idea that Gloomhaven is this 25-pound box full of goodies and that Frosthaven is potentially 50% bigger is absolutely crazy. And I'm really curious about how do you do this without losing your mind? And but before we get into that, let's get a good working definition. As we're talking about big games, massive games, what does that mean exactly? Maybe you don't have a specific guideline. Well, if it goes over 2.25 hours, but give me just your kind of basic idea as far as what are we talking about when it comes to big games?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. Maybe it's pretty well aligned with legacy games. I'm just thinking of games where or campaign games, right? Just a huge amount of content, right? So it's not just these are all the components that you're going to need to play this one game, and you can play it over and over if you want. But a game that a single a single game of that is like not well defined, but like there's other stuff like on the periphery that will sort of add to the like campaign element of the games. Like you play it once, and then maybe you add all these other components in, and you can play it again like a different way. I don't know. I think that's kind of the difficult part of designing this type of game, right? Is that it's not just like a single game. I mean, you could probably call like Terra Mystica or Feast for Odin like big games with a lot of stuff going on. Um, but there's like, I don't know, that extra element of design where you're like not just thinking about a single game, but thinking about how this game like evolves and like tells a story over multiple plays. Um, I guess in my mind, that's what makes something big in this weird definition that I've created.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, you could have a game that only plays 30 minutes at a time, but at the same time takes, 20 hours for a person to go through the whole story, the campaign, the different scenarios. And that would definitely qualify as a big game, as a massive game, because you have all this extra stuff for players to experience. And so, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And now, why? Why in the world, Isaac, would you design a game that takes I can't imagine how long these games take to put together. And so, why in the world would you do this kind of thing?
Just because it's interesting. It fascinates me. That you can tell like this really involved story and like build this entire world that people can experience like through a board game. And yeah, it's just a really fun place to explore. I mean, it takes a long time to do it, but for me, like it's well worth the time put in.
Right, and just the community that's grown up around Gloomhaven, I guess they would also say that the time is worth it. I mean, I can't imagine how many hours you put into Gloomhaven, and we'll get into that in just a minute. But that time was well spent because that community loves the game. I mean, it's the number one on Board Game Geek right now, the highest rated game, and so yeah, obviously time well spent. And so, like, how long did Gloomhaven take? Actually, let me back up a second. When you first started designing Gloomhaven, did you picture it being as big as it became, or did it start off as like this is going to be a 2 hour experience, and then you just started adding more and more to it? Tell me kind of like about the genesis of that game.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I know I wanted to like create a campaign game with like a big world that you could kind of explore. Right from the start. But even with that, like it's important to kind of start small with what you're doing. So yeah, I mean, the initial goal was just create like a single good game experience, right? So we had like I created like this first scenario with a couple different monsters and four different player classes that you could try out, and then I just kind of like played that over and over until that core game loop was fun and interesting. And then, like once you have that, then you can sort of start growing it from there. It's like, okay, well, this is game one of this campaign. What does game two look like? Like, how does the world evolve from there? And what are these other elements that you can add to like keep things interesting over multiple games? Um, yeah, so that's kind of the general process.
Very cool. Now, when I talk to a lot of new designers, a lot of them have these big ideas for these grandiose games that are 2 hours, 3 hour experiences, or these long campaigns and that kind of thing. And they get overwhelmed and they don't know where to start. And they have ideas in their head, or they've written things down in a notebook, but then they get stuck because it's just such an overwhelming, daunting idea of trying to bring this thing to life. And so a lot of times my advice is, well, just start with one thing at a time. Design a combat system, design a movement system, design one little thing without
Yeah.
any asymmetrical abilities or cards or powers, just one little thing. Is that like, tell me your advice. Like, that's what I would tell people. Would you tell them something similar, or like tell me kind of your process for starting one of these big ideas? Like, where do you begin?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, a game design is an iterative process, right? So you got to start with something, and and you create that, and iterate on it and build on it, and then iterate on that, and then build, keep adding to it and iterating and adding and iterating. Like that's what you got to do. Like what, no matter how big it is, you always start small and sort of build from there. So that's definitely good advice.
And with
Yeah,
Gloomhaven, where did you start? What was the first thing you worked on?
let me think. I mean, yeah, so it was that first scenario, and I mean, I'd created this other sort of tactical combat game before I started working on Gloomhaven, that had like some elements. So I mean, like I you could consider that like where I started. And it was just this idea of like, how do I, uh, what's like the basic like tactical combat system that I want to do. Do you want to do um, squares or hexes, or how do you want the monsters to act, or like the mechanics of like how my units work and how enemy units work. And um, that ended up kind of like failing. And then I think the sort of the main seed of like what Gloomhaven actually grew from was like the 2 card mechanic. Like so that kind of like sat on the back burner for a while until that idea sort of came to me. And then uh everything just kind of like snowballed from there. So it was like, okay, so I have these 2 cards. Like the top half of the card is for attacking, and the bottom half of the card is for moving. Like how so I need to make a bunch of ability cards for the character classes that I want. So you create like 8 to 12 for each of those character classes, and then once you have those cards, then you can set them down in this tactical combat system. Create a simple map, and then sort of go from there. Like see how those cards like interact with everything else, and sort of iterate from there.
Very cool. And then, like, how do you know, like, how much is too much? You know what I mean? Like, you've got a 25-pound box, but I'm assuming it could have been 35. It could have been 50. Like, you could have just kept designing things. And so, how did you know that this many characters is enough? This many scenarios is enough? Like, tell me your personal understanding of enough. And obviously, it's going to be maybe a little bit different. Other people might go, I think 4 characters, 50 scenarios is too much. And you're like, no, we need 1,000. But, like, tell me your personal understanding of, like, how much is enough?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I feel like with Gloomhaven, I never really hit that point. Like, and yeah, I think a normal person would have drawn the line somewhere and said, yeah, that's enough. But I for me, it was always just like, I just want to add as much as I can to this. Like, I want to make this feel like as expansive as possible. And so yeah, I pretty much like threw in every scenario idea I had, every character class idea I had. I just threw it all in that box, and that's kind of one of the reasons it ended up being so massive. And I mean, Frosthaven is kind of a different story, because like now that I realize sort of the implications of throwing everything in, there, you know, I mean, there's going to be like 138 scenarios in Frosthaven, but I think there could have been a lot more. Just and so at some point I did say, okay, well, yeah, this is enough. I guess like 138, yeah, that's enough. And we could have had more character classes, but again, like I realized I was sort of like using Gloomhaven as a metric, where it's just like, okay, well, I don't want to make anything like too much bigger than this, because this is already like stupidly big. So we should probably put some limits on ourselves. So yeah, like at the end of the day, Gloomhaven is enough for me.
And I guess it helps when you are the person in charge of the publishing, because then
Yeah,
you don't have to worry about things as much as, if you're a designer licensing your game to a publisher, then they might think, okay, 10 scenarios is enough. We don't need 138. That's crazy. But if you're in charge, hey, you can put 1 million in there if you want to. And but
yeah.
tell me about Jaws of the Lion. So Jaws of the Lion is like a kind of not necessarily a streamlined, but just kind of a smaller version of Gloomhaven. I hadn't played it, but that's kind of what I understand. So tell me about that. Was that your idea, or did someone come to you and say, "Hey, we love Gloomhaven, but it's too big to sell in our stores"? Because I think that one shows up in Target and kind of big box stores. And so tell me about that and how you determined, all right, let's make this a smaller product and then put it out there, maybe making it a little bit more accessible to a larger audience.
Sure. Yeah. So I don't really remember like where the idea originated. I think like I met with PSI like many years ago. They're like I don't know, they're kind of a distributor like to Targets. They're, like, we love your game. If you have any ideas for like a product that could work in a Target space, let us know. Like that was kind of our first meeting like many, many years ago. And I'm like, okay, well, let me think about it. And so that kind of idea percolated for like a year or two. And I watch people play Gloomhaven. I read all the feedback on Board Game Geek and Reddit and all that. And you sort of, I sort of refine this idea of like, okay, yeah, what would it look like if we tried to have Gloomhaven reach a wider market? Somebody that's not interested in the 25-pound, $140 box. What would we keep? What would we cut out? Like how big would the campaign be? Like, how big would the box be? And so that, it definitely feels like more like what a product from like a publisher that's actually concerned about getting their game on shelves, like what it would actually look like. And I don't think we could have done it like from the start though, which is kind of the interesting thing. We kind of had to make this giant thing and then like cut it down into like what Jaws of the Lion is. And they're two like very different products at the end of the day. Like I'm very happy with both of them. But yeah, I think that's sort of the process of how Jaws of the Lion came to be.
Yeah, very cool. Now, help me understand a little bit better why you don't think you could have gone in reverse as far as like starting with a smaller package and then moving on to like the giant, 25-pound box thing.
Yeah, I said that, didn't I? And now I have to think about why I said that.
Is it partially because of the hype and just kind of how many people were already on board? You already had this big community built up, and maybe it would have been harder to have a smaller product and then move up, or just kind of give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it. I mean, obviously, like it's hard for me to say I should have done anything different when, Gloomhaven is so successful as it is. And so yeah, like the way things happen just seems like the natural way things should have happened to me. But I think like a lot of game design is sort of like taking all these big ideas and then like distilling them down into, the perfect product. And so, yeah, maybe I could have done that. Maybe like I could have just never released Gloomhaven and just like made this giant thing and then cut it down into something like Jaws of the Lion. But at the same time, like, I don't know, they are two different products. So like, I think, the world has a place for both of them, but yeah, it's this idea of, I think like a lot of board games like start bigger than they actually end up being, because they're sort of edited and distilled down into like the optimal play experience. But I don't know. Yeah, maybe there should be like more sort of like large. What's the word I'm looking for? Like not unrefined, but just like a little rough around the edges games.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point. They're two different products, and they're not necessarily for the same target audience. I think there's going to be some overlap. Obviously, some people that love Gloomhaven are going to love Jaws of the Lion, and for similar reasons. But at the same time, someone who sits down with their play group and they're like, "Hey, we're going to go through all 100 of these scenarios." Like that's a different type of player than someone that sits down and says, "I just want to play through the 12 missions of Pandemic Legacy, and 12 is enough. Like, those
Yeah.
are two different types of gamers. And so, yeah, I think that's something interesting to think through is who is your target audience? And something I'm working on right now is this. It's a pretty massive game in scope. It didn't start off that way, but it turned into it the more I added to it, the more I wanted to add story. And I want to get your ideas on story here in just a minute because I'm sitting here taking notes for a lot of the stuff myself. And this game I'm working on, it's basically Pokemon mixed with Mega Man in this kind of big, sprawling, open world, and you're doing cool stuff, and there's puzzles, and it's hopefully going to be a really fun experience. It takes roughly 30 hours or so to get through. And
All
I thought
right.
about, like, do I want to go the Gloomhaven route? Do I want to have this massive box full of stuff, or do I want to go smaller at a time and offer expansions where here's the open world, and if you want to go way off in the distance to the right, well, here's an expansion that's $20, $30, something like that, and you can do that. Or if you want to go way off on to the left after you kind of finish the game and you want to go explore to the left, well, here's a different expansion where you can go do that instead. And that's kind of the approach I'm taking because I think that's more in line with what my target audience is going to want. But at the same time, I don't know that there's a wrong answer. It's just about figuring out, who is the game for, and then how do we market it towards them, both in marketing, but also as the size of the game, the weight of the game, the number of hours of content inside there, and then just kind of go from there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, Gloomhaven is like a lifestyle commitment, right? I mean, so, and yeah, not everyone wants that, and so, like, I was genuinely surprised at like how well it did, like, given that, right? Like, the audience for it ended up being much much bigger than I expected. I never imagined it would do as well as it did. But then also, like, it sort of leads you, yeah, to that Jaws of the Lion approach where, like, okay, well, it's like so many people love this when there are so many barriers to entry. Like, if we were able to take them all out, like, how many more people could we get on board? And that was sort of one of the impetuses behind Jaws of the Lion. But yeah, the other thing that you talked about, right, is like the path of like one giant game versus like a smaller game with lots of little expansions. Like, I don't know, like, I still couldn't tell you like how I could have like chopped Gloomhaven up, where it's like, oh well, yeah, if you want to do a scenario over here in the Dagger Forest or whatever, like, you got to buy this expansion. Like, the world, because I wanted the world to just like feel so interconnected and have everything connected to each other. Like, I couldn't imagine like, chopping, scenarios 70 to 90 off into their own separate products. Like, it, yeah, that would have been much harder. And maybe that's like my limitation as a designer. Like, maybe there is a way to do that appropriately, but I couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, how in the world do you hold a player's attention for 100 scenarios? Like, what are some things you did in the design process as far as, like, maybe, leveling up your characters and the world changing? But just tell me your thoughts on keeping people's attention so that they stick around for so many games.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's sort of an inherent draw to just like a campaign, and sort of, getting like this longer story and seeing how things go over a long period of time. Um, I mean, like, take like Pandemic Legacy for instance. I mean, I kind of feel bad saying this, but like, I don't really like Pandemic. Like, the core gameplay loop of Pandemic, I don't find that interesting. But you make a legacy version of it where like things change from game to game, and you get like the story, and you want to see like what's going to happen next, like what's going to happen after that, and it becomes like far more compelling to me. And so yeah, like, I really enjoyed like playing through Pandemic Legacy season 1 and 2. And I think there's like, just doing that, I think, will add sort of that element for people. But I mean, it also helps if that core gameplay loop is entertaining and fun for people. And so, I think a lot of the success of Gloomhaven just comes from that two card mechanic, and how how interesting it is to just sit down with your hand of cards and like figure out, okay, which two cards do I want to play and how do I want to play them and how's that going to affect my future turns. There's just like a lot of depth to that core gameplay loop that I think sort of engages with a lot of people. But then, sort of going back to that campaign element, though, like it's also important to um, constantly like reward players, right? Like just hit them with that dopamine, like over and over, right, as much as you can. And so, with character progression and sort of other types of progression, like after every game of Gloomhaven, like you're always getting something, like whether it's a new item or you're getting perks or you're leveling up and getting new cards to choose from. You do want to kind of make every game they play different. And another big part of that for Gloomhaven was the retirement system. Where after you play like 10 to 15 games, also now you're retiring your character, and you're unlocking this entirely new character class that plays completely differently, which is exciting. And then you immediately get to, pick them up and start playing with them. And now you're playing like an entirely new game. Like you've got entirely new cards and you're making entirely new decisions. And so yeah, just having a really solid core gameplay loop and then just constantly um, changing the game, like from game to game, so like it's always new every time you play it. I think those are kind of the two key elements of keeping people interested.
Yeah, and I think you really cracked the code on how to do this effectively. Both with, there's always new stuff, whether I'm gaining new cards for my deck and now how am I going to use these cards and to make really cool new combinations. And I love how every time you sit down to play a scenario with, the combat, it's a new puzzle to solve. It's like, okay, how am I going to use these cards that I have and the cards that I know are in my deck coming up, and okay, that enemy's over there and that treasure chest is there and we got to do this and that. It's a new puzzle every single time. And then, like you said, 10, 15, 20 games in, now I get new puzzles to figure out because I have a new character and everything is all of a sudden exciting again. It's not like going through 100 scenarios with the exact same character that it gets a little bit samey. It's like, no, we get new stuff, get new ways for the game to play out. And it's fun. And I think that's the thing. How do you make the core of your game, and in your case, it's combat. How do you make that as fun as possible? Because that's the thing that people do the most. And so really focusing in on that, I think is really the way to go. But let's talk about some of the other things going on. You have some story elements where it's a little bit legacy, where your choices on one little story might affect something that happens later in the game and things like that. Tell me how you handled story, how you kept track of everything. There's so many different options and things that can play into it. Tell me about the story piece of the game.
Oh, sure. So, I mean, I approached it, from a background of, like DMing D&D campaigns, where, where you sort of kind of like build this world for your players, and then in some respects just kind of like react to what they do, but then also like, drop in, you know, interesting nuggets here and there that they, or threads, right, that they can follow along and play out with. Um, and so I guess sort of that same mentality came into the creation of Gloomhaven, where I don't know, I never really considered like this like a standard like story arc to kind of be the main focus of the game. So there's kind of like a final scenario where you fight a final boss, but I really wanted it to feel more of just like this open world that people could just kind of do whatever they wanted in. So there's like half the scenarios are side scenarios, so you're always able to like, oh well, let's just go over there and see what's over there, and there'll be something interesting over there for you to explore. So that was my approach to the story. And also in order to do that, right, I also wanted to create kind of like a choose your own adventure type thing, like where the story was not linear, where you make one decision and that will inevitably lead to more decisions, and you just keep like making decisions and branching off in different directions. And I think that was successful to some extent, also like unsuccessful. Like for a lot of people, it was hard to kind of follow what the story was, because maybe you're only playing like once a week, and so you sit down, you're like, oh, we'll try this scenario, and then there's some story text, and you're like, oh, what, I don't remember what happened in the last scenario or three scenarios back. And so there's some of that. But I also like, maybe for those reasons, tried to keep the story like a little simpler. Like it's also not I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say. but anyway, yeah, so there's just like a little bit of story nuggets in there, but that's not like grand epic writing of some, like, I don't know, massive world ending thing necessarily. It's just kind of like a bunch of little stories kind of connected together. That's kind of how I wanted it to feel. And yeah, I guess that's it.
Yeah, but that makes sense because again, that's not the core of your game. People aren't coming to Gloomhaven because they want to read a novel. They're coming to Gloomhaven
Right.
for the puzzle of that combat system. And so I think really
Yeah.
understanding that and making the story smaller makes a lot of sense. Now, when it comes to dealing with balance, especially when you have an open world or at least a somewhat open world, how do you make sure that players aren't going into scenarios and just getting crushed or just like breezing through it because it's too easy? In video games, they have a couple different ways where sometimes they just let you go and you do get crushed and you go, okay, I'm not going to go back there until I am 10 levels stronger and then I'll deal with that. Or the system levels up for you. So no matter where you go, the enemies are always kind of leveled appropriately compared to your level. Tell me
Yeah.
how you handled that in your game, Gloomhaven and Frosthaven, depending on if it's different.
Yeah, so that second approach is kind of what I had to do, largely because of the nature of the story and how like you can basically, could like go into any scenario at sort of any point in your journey. One group might go into this side scenario at level 1, and another group might go in there at level 9, and like the game needs to be challenging, in both cases. So yeah, I mean, there's just a very simple system of as you level up, the monsters level up with you, so they have levels themselves, that kind of scale with you. And I mean, I think in some respects, I think a lot of people will agree that sort of as you level up, like, the game doesn't quite level up at the same rate, and so by the end of it, you kind of feel a little bit overpowered compared to the monsters. And typically, like, people will up the difficulty, which is the other thing you can do right in the game. Is if you're at any point, if you feel like it's too easy, you can just artificially level up the monsters to whatever you want to make it as challenging as you want. And so a lot of people end up doing that with Gloomhaven. They'll do it on +1 or +2 difficulty, to keep it interesting. And then with Frosthaven, like, we're trying to balance it a little better. So hopefully, um, there'll be less of that, right? Because like you don't want to depend on your player to, do that all the time, right? I mean, ideally, you should be doing that yourself, like within their own systems, and you're just using like the difficulty setting as a stopgap. So like, because you also have to like design for different skill levels. Um, so there does need to be some variability with what the player can choose to do for themselves with increasing the difficulty, because some players are better than other players. So, but yeah, it's all about creating like a malleable difficulty system that will naturally increase over time, but also giving players the flexibility to change it themselves as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good way to conquer that design challenge. Another huge design challenge is the game has to remember. So it's not like a normal game where you put it back in the box and it doesn't matter what happened last session because we're going to start over from the beginning. These games need to remember where you were, what happened, how you leveled up, how much gold you have, all those kinds of things. So tell me about the systems that you came up with to basically track changes. I know there's stickers. I know there's different things going on. Tell me about that process of figuring out, okay, how do we save the game over and over and over again?
Yeah. So so yeah, I think one of the main things is just what scenarios you have unlocked. Which we did through the world map with all the stickers that you place on it, and then you sort of cross them off as you complete them. And I think that ended up being like a really interesting feature for the game, just because the world map itself becomes like so evocative of your experience. It starts off as kind of like this blank slate, and then the more you play, like the more you sort of fill in all the little corners of the world and all the different little things that you can do. Um, and so yeah, I think that ended up being really really cool way to track that. And then other than that, you're just also tracking character progression or the other types of progression like prosperity level and stuff. And so yeah, just using notepads. Each character has a notepad. You've got a notepad for your party to like sort of track the reputation. You're tracking the prosperity along the bottom of the map board. And so yeah, you just kind of got to accept that this is a thing that's gonna have like permanent change to it. So you're gonna take your pencils, you're gonna take your markers, and you're gonna mark it up. You're gonna put stickers on it, um, and that's how it remembers, is by making permanent changes. And in that way, like it almost feels like more of like a lasting, like meaningful experience, right? Because you are making these permanent changes to your game that you can't unchange.
Yeah, definitely. For my own game, this is something I looked a lot at. It's like, how do you do this? And I took a lot of cues from Dungeons and Dragons, where you have your character sheet, and it is expected that you're going to write on this thing, and you might even have to print off a new one because you've written on it so many times. And are you
Yeah.
going to be able to do different things and add stickers to it, or make these permanent changes just to kind of keep track and make it easy? And I think that's one way to do it. And there's lots of different ways, and there's lots of save systems now with other games. It's interesting. Seventh Continent, Tainted
Yeah.
Grail. Like there's a lot of different ways that games have overcome this in different ways. Now, when it comes to the different scenarios, and you have 100 plus in your games, how do you keep those interesting? How do you make sure that scenario 12 is just as interesting as scenario 7, and scenario 85 is just as interesting as the ones before it? How do you ensure that? What are some things you do to make things interesting to the players, no matter which scenario they're playing?
So I mean, the main thing we did there was just have like a huge variety of monsters. And so that's something like a lot of dungeon crawls end up like prohibiting themselves against doing by focusing on like miniatures. um I think, I don't know, I can't think even now of like another like dungeon crawl game that uses like standees instead of miniatures, because like I don't know, the community seems like so focused on miniatures and like how beautiful they are and all that, and that's great, but like to me that's like not um necessary for like a good gameplay experience. Like for me, it's all just about the mechanics, and so I wanted to sort of get away from that and really focus on yeah, like making this an interesting experience that somebody can play like 100 times and not feel like they're doing the same thing over and over. And so yeah, one of the necessary parts to that was having a large variety of monsters to sort of pick from, so you're always going up against something new and trying to figure out how they work, and sort of reacting to their abilities, right? Because like it's not just, all these monsters aren't just like, oh well, this one has 3 attack and this one has 4 attack, and that's why they're different. Like each set of monsters has a different deck of ability cards, and so we have a separate deck for all the monsters, which is a lot of cards at the end of the day, but I think it works out really well. So like, especially that first time you approach a monster that you've never seen, like you don't know what that deck is going to do, and so you're just kind of almost like sitting there defensively, like, okay, what are they going to do? Like we got to learn like how to react to all their various unique abilities. And so yeah, I think that's sort of the main part of keeping things interesting. And there's a lot of people like to complain about how like Gloomhaven, like a lot of the scenarios are just kill all enemies. Like, oh, this is the same goal again and again, but like each time it's still different. Like if you sit down and play it, um, you're going to get a different experience every time because you're fighting different monsters. There's a different map, um, which leads to different tactics, depending on the layout of like obstacles and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I mean, if you create enough content, enough monsters, enough map tiles, enough other features that you can put on the map tiles, like it's very easy to create these different experiences. And then in addition to that, like you can create scenarios other than kill all monsters, which we are trying to do more in Frosthaven, really sort of like stretch the limits of like, what you can do with scenarios and, you know, interesting special rules that like aren't too complicated. Ideally, like they're these small extra rules that just completely change the scenarios in different ways. So you're always having to think on your feet and try new things. So yeah.
Right. Right. That makes a lot of sense. And every scenario is a different puzzle. So even if it is kill all the things, it's still a different puzzle the way that that's going to be accomplished. And I think as designers of board games, we can also learn from video game designers. Think about a game like Dark Souls. That game is really just go kill the big bad boss monsters, but you're never sure how that boss monster is going to behave. How are they going to move? How are they going to attack? How are they going to do different things? And it even takes typically several tries before you figure out the patterns and you can actually overcome that battle. And people are obviously drawn to that game and those games like it. And so I think there's something we can definitely learn from those. Now, when it comes to other things you've learned in the process of going into Frosthaven, things you learned from Gloomhaven, tell me about some of the other game design things that you picked up along the way. They're like, okay, let's do this a little bit differently. Let's do this in a new way as far as going into Frosthaven.
Yeah, I mean, like the evolution of Gloomhaven to Frosthaven, I think sort of adding more in between scenario elements, I think is going to be a really interesting and engaging aspect of Frosthaven. Because like a lot of people, you see Gloomhaven as just one combat after another, and there's not really anything else interesting going on. You can do some light role playing if you want, but and a lot of people, that's why they come. That's why they enjoy the game because of the combat. But I really wanted to like sort of create more in between stuff to. I think it'll help people sort of engage with the world a bit more. So you've got this town that you're like trying to keep alive and like build up, sort of gathering resources to build different buildings that'll help you out in different ways, both in and out of combat. And I'm hoping like, it'll allow people to sort of engage with the story and engage with the world a little bit more. And so, because really at the end of the day, like I just want to create like as an immersive experience as possible. And so I think that's important to me. And then just, I don't know, also just iterating on Gloomhaven is just kind of taking things in a slightly more complex direction, so you've got more interesting, diverse characters that are doing different things that you haven't seen before, new monsters that are, doing different things you haven't seen before. So yeah, it's just, it's hard to like point to like one specific thing and say, well, yeah, I learned that, and so this is what we're doing now. But it's just kind of like, everything is just sort of this evolution of what was in Gloomhaven, just kind of taking it to the next level with Frosthaven. I don't know.
Awesome. Let's move over into the business side of things when it comes to hiring help and project management and marketing and Kickstarter and all of that. Tell me about your process of project management, especially early on when you were working on Gloomhaven. Like, was it just you by yourself, and now you've moved on to having partners and other teammates? Tell me about kind of the team of people that worked on Gloomhaven, or didn't. Maybe it was you. I don't know. Maybe you're just a wizard that did all of it. I'm not sure, but just tell me about that side of things.
Gloomhaven, that was a trip. I don't even know. Like looking back on it, I guess that was like 5 years ago. I was kind of in the thick of working on this game, and I mean, I don't want to say like, oh yeah, it was just me. I mean, we had an artist, a graphic designer, had some playtesting help, some people helping like create scenarios. Um, but yeah, I mean, for the most part, it was just me like sitting at my computer for like 18 months or something, and cracking out this game. And I honestly, I don't know how I did it. It was just a lot of work, and I don't even have like a good project management system. Like it's just like I kind of just kept a lot of the intricacies just sort of in my head, and just like, okay, well, today I'm working on these scenarios, and tomorrow I'm working on these scenarios, and then we're going to figure out how to put them all together, and create all these items, and create these new characters, and playtest them. And I don't know, it's just, I mean, it took forever, but at the end of the day, it got done. And I look back on it, and I'm not sure, because like things have like progressed significantly since then. Like working on Frosthaven has been a much different experience, because now like we do have more people in the company, and like their help has been tremendous, like to the point of like um like I'm still struggling to get everything done, even though now like I have all these people like doing all this other stuff for me, and it's like, well, how before on Gloomhaven, like how did I do all the stuff I'm doing and do all the stuff they're doing? Like how did that happen? I can't even fathom it anymore. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you.
Now, what are some of the things that people are helping you with now?
So just well, I mean, for one, like just the business aspect of things, so I have like a an operations manager who kind of handles a lot of the business oriented stuff. And I guess like dealing with Gloomhaven, I didn't really have to do that. I mean, I had like the Kickstarter, and I had to keep up with that, and sort of communicate with all the fans of the Kickstarter directly, which took a lot of time. Or the backers of the Kickstarter. But I also, like, I wasn't dealing with licensing and translations and all that stuff back then, because nothing had been made yet. So yeah, in some respects, like I guess that stuff wasn't as big a deal back then. But also, yeah, just like a community manager now, who is like looking at all the Kickstarter responses and answering them, and just doing all that myself. I remember taking up just like a huge amount of time. But then also, yeah, on the other side, I have a lot of development help now. And so, I've got like a team of people who help develop a lot of the systems in Frosthaven, sort of the new systems in Frosthaven. And, that's been a huge help. And then also all of the playtesting, like the whole playtesting community we've sort of built up, didn't really exist much back in the Gloomhaven days. And I was basically just organizing playtesting myself, like with just my friends every week. And that was pretty much it. And then also like all the guest designs that were done, as part of like the Frosthaven Kickstarter. So, I've only designed maybe about like half the scenarios in Frosthaven. And so a lot of other people have worked there to help out.
Very cool. Now, when did you know when to hire some of these people? Like, at what threshold did you go, okay, this is too much for me, too many comments, there's too much to think about on the business side? How did you know when to start reaching out and hiring other people?
Yeah, I don't really hire people until like I absolutely have to, which is probably not the best philosophy. Yeah, so there was a point. So yeah, it was just me like running the company, doing everything, up until sometime after like the second Gloomhaven Kickstarter. So the one that launched after the first printing was released, and it was like $4 million, however many backers that was. I guess it was 40, no, yeah, 40,000 backers, because it was like about $100 a piece. Anyway, yeah, so I had like this Kickstarter with like 40,000 backers. Um, and I realized like I just wasn't gonna be able to communicate with all of them and still do everything else I needed to do. So that's really the first thing I did. Was like I hired Bryce Johnson part time, and then over time, like he ended up like just taking on more and more responsibility as I, just kept getting more and more overwhelmed with everything I was doing. And so now like eventually I hired him full time as like an operations marketing manager. Um, and then, even at that point, now he's got all these other responsibilities, because the company continues to grow. Like, now we've got localization partners, and, we're dealing with licensing for, comics and everything else that's happening. So at some point he's like, well, I can't handle all this either. Like, so now we need to hire somebody else to like sort of take over the community management, especially as we were like approaching the Frosthaven Kickstarter. And then, we sort of realized that I was sort of falling behind on my duties as like a sort of creative manager, dealing with artists and graphic design and all of that. That's something I would handle myself, sort of directing artists and graphic designers on what exactly to be working on. And I was sort of falling behind on that. So then eventually we hired a creative director as well. And that's pretty much where we are now. Yeah.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And I feel like once you get to a place where you're spending too much time, and that's going to be different for everybody, whatever you decide is too much time on things that aren't helping move the company forward or aren't
Yeah.
helping getting more games designed, or maybe you just don't like it or you're not good at it. That's something I ran into with several campaigns I recently ran. It's like, I'm just not great at logistics and I hate it. So let
Yeah.
me hire someone to help with shipping and fulfillment. And my life became much better because of it. And so I think this is something a lot of people can learn, is like, how do you figure out how to kind of multiply yourself through other people and get more done along the way. Now
Yeah. Absolutely.
let's talk about timelines. How do you figure out how long a game like this is going to take? You talked about 18 months of just staring at your computer and getting things done. Was that about how long you thought it would take? Was that longer? Was it shorter? Like, how do you figure out, okay, there's 138 scenarios. It's going to take me 2 weeks to do each one. Like, help me understand breaking down timelines so you actually get things delivered to backers when you tell them you will.
Well, yeah, I'm certainly not the authority on that, because I am notoriously late with my Kickstarters. Um, just yeah, I am not good at gauging like how much time it's going to take me to do things. I always like overestimate my ability, and then even when I sort of try and compensate for that, it's like, okay, well, I'm overestimating how quickly I'll be able to get this done, so let's add a couple months, and it's still like, oh well, no, actually, I probably should have added like 6 months. Um, so so yeah, I don't necessarily have a good answer to that. What I can tell you though is like, especially in terms of like Kickstarter, if you even if you can't like accurately determine like how long your project is going to take, you know, try and give as honest and informed answer as you can. But I think the most important thing is also just to provide constant communication to your backers. So if something goes wrong or something is taking longer than you thought it was initially, just tell your backers. Like, just constantly communicate with them about where you are with your timeline, what's going on, what you did over the past 2 weeks or whatever. And typically, like, that has been just a huge benefit to me, and just my Kickstarter backers sort of understanding, where I'm coming from, like why things are taking longer than initially projected, and they're very understanding. I feel like, as long as you're honest and upfront with them, and don't like disappear for months at a time. That's kind of my solution to not being very good at figuring out how long things take.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, communicate. Just openly communicate about the things that are going on. People tend to be very understanding when things pop up, especially things out of your control. I mean, with games, who knows how long international shipping might take? It might be a month longer than you anticipated, or things at the factory, something might happen. Or when you're, producing 40,000 games, so I can't imagine how big was the print run. So if you had 40,000 backers, how many games did you print in total for that?
Oh, that print run I think was 80,000, because we also had like at least like, yeah, 20,000 retail orders that we weren't able to fulfill from the first printing. And then some more on top of that, so that we wouldn't have to immediately do a third printing after that. So yeah, that was a big print run.
Yeah, that's crazy. How long did that take just at the factory to print that many games?
I don't know, it was a while ago, but yeah, it took a while, because I mean, I could do the math real fast here, right? Because there's like, how many games can I fit on a container? I mean, in terms of Gloomhaven, we're putting, I think it was like either 32 or 36 games on a pallet, like, because it was palletized, like, each game was in its own box because it was so big. So like, you have 36 games, and you got 20 pallets in a container, so then you're looking at 720, something around there, games per container. And then you're able to ship out, maybe like 20 contain 20 containers. I don't know. Anyway, I'm getting into the weeds here, but yeah, your factory can only produce so much at a time, and we're using a pretty big factory, so that can vary greatly depending on what factory you're using. So that's, yeah, if you're working on a big game, it's definitely a good thing to know, like how quickly um, they can get that out. Sorry, I'm kind of floundering here with the question because I don't remember, but
No
yeah, it
worries.
was like at least a month or two, like from when it started getting shipped out to when it was done getting shipped out.
Yeah, it just takes a long time. It's not even just the design and the art and all that. It's all the other stuff that goes in it that have to be accounted for. Now, when it comes to marketing one of these kind of games, how do you build hype? And like we just said, it's going to take a long time for the game to come out, and so you don't necessarily want to build up too much hype and then wait 2 years necessarily for the game to come out and actually get on people's tables. So, how do you manage hype? How do you deal with marketing for one of these massive games?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that kind of goes back to the earlier question of yeah, I was doing it all myself, and I'm certainly not a marketing expert, so I had no idea what I was doing, and it just kind of worked out anyway, just based on the strength of the game, I think. But yeah, going into Frosthaven, I think I can, my experiences with that, I probably answer the question a little bit better because I think we did do a lot of intelligent marketing on that. Yeah, just in terms of like when we announced it and sort of leading up to the Kickstarter and all that. I mean, yeah, because like I started working on Frosthaven like almost as soon as like Gloomhaven was to the printer. I sort of came up with this initial concept, but yeah, it's like I can't like announce anything about it right now because like it's not going to come out for 5-6 years, so that doesn't make any sense. So yeah, we sort of waited, and I, just kept working on it and working on it, working on it. And I think that's generally how it is in the industry until, you sort of get an idea of when it will come out. And then you sort of work back from there. Like, okay, well, when should we launch the Kickstarter? When should we announce the Kickstarter? And all of that. When should we sort of tease things out a little bit at a time? So yeah, we decided, ultimately, like, based on the initial plan, like Frosthaven would have been out already, or at least, um, sort of being shipped out at this point. So we're definitely like behind schedule. But anyway, so yeah, the initial idea was that yeah, we could probably run the Kickstarter early last year, which so we did. So we should probably like announce around PAX. And so yeah, we put a lot of effort into like that big announcement at PAX back in 2019. Sorry, PAX Unplugged, which I think like worked out really well, and like we kind of like took over that convention to some extent. We had this really stupid idea of like making a bunch of foam Algox horns, um, which if you were at the convention you saw were just everywhere. We kind of got that idea from an earlier convention show, or we went when we went to PAX West. There was some like new version of like Dragon Ball coming out, for some video game, and it, like everyone was running around with like these similar concept of like this foam headband that had like Goku hair, like sort of Super Saiyan Goku hair coming up, and we're like, yeah, that's a really effective marketing tool. We should probably do that. So we made some horns for PAX Unplugged, and yeah, just had like a big booth and had just lots lots of cool stuff going on at the booth to kind of build up hype, and I think that sort of worked really well. Just then kind of like roll that hype over the next couple months into the actual Kickstarter and just get everybody excited about it. Constantly sort of releasing new content. Sort of what little snippets of like what was going to be involved in that. And then once you're on the Kickstarter and it's like successful, then you've got sort of your own captive audience after that. We've got like however many backers we have for the Kickstarter. They're getting emails every week, every 2 weeks from me, sort of on updates, so I can kind of ideally like keep them interested in the product until it actually arrives. I kind of like try to give them snippets of information or like explain new mechanics that are being introduced like over time. Like each update I try to add something in there to keep them interested. But yeah, I mean, it's a wholly different experience for something like Frosthaven than it is for somebody new to the industry, right? Because like obviously we just have this huge built-in audience already, a bunch of people just already like clamoring for whatever we do next because of their experience with our previous games. And so if you're a first time publisher, first time designer, like it's a entirely different landscape. And I mean, I could speak to that somewhat, with my first projects with Forge War, but also that was again like 6-7 years ago. And so in that last 6-7 years, things have changed dramatically. Where like I'm not sure. Well, I can tell you for sure, like what I did with Forge War and like making it be successful like 7 years ago, it would not have worked today. Like with how I don't know how much bigger the industry is, how much bigger like the Kickstarter industry is, and all of that. So I don't know. I guess I'm done answering that question for now.
Yeah, definitely. As much as it is different for you because you have this huge community and all that, it's still got some similar concepts. One of the main ones I want to highlight is the nurturing of your email list and making sure you're sending out regular updates. And even if you're only updating in a small way or just posting, hey, I did a playtest and here's a picture from it of the prototype, whatever, but just constantly once every couple of weeks, at least once a month at minimum, sending emails out to your list and saying, "Hey, the game's moving along," and because it just keeps the game on people's minds, it keeps it kind of front of their attention, and so when the game does release on Kickstarter or come out in pre-order or whatever, that people are aware of it. They're like, "Oh yeah, this game, I've been hearing about it throughout its entire progression," and so I'm definitely going to
Yeah.
show up. Now, when it comes to Kickstarter, how much do you have done? Like, what? Give me an idea, maybe percentage or scenarios, something like that. How much should you have done before the Kickstarter? Like when the Kickstarter launches, how much of the game should be finished so that people can see it, previewers can take a look at it on their YouTube channels? Give me some ideas.
Yeah, I mean, there are different philosophies there, and I think a lot of companies are sort of approaching it now as like it should be like almost completely done by the time it hits Kickstarter. And I mean, I think there's a lot of validity to that philosophy. You've seen like recent Kickstarters. I don't know, like Darwin's Journey, for instance, which the game was pretty much done when it came on Kickstarter, and that was really successful from my point of view because like they had like a really well scripted, like fully implemented version of it on Tabletop Simulator. So like people can just go and like play the game, like just play like the game like as it will actually look on your table, like with all the rules already implemented and everything. It was just I don't know. I was very impressed by the by the Tabletop Simulator module, and that really sort of helps cement like, oh well, whether I'm gonna like this game or not. Like um, and I think that is sort of becoming a bigger thing, especially in the pandemic. This the importance and use of Tabletop Simulator as a marketing tool for your Kickstarters, I guess. Sorry, got a little weeds on what I was talking about there, but
No worries. Yeah, I totally agree. It's something to definitely keep in mind. Is how much are you going to have done? Having only 10% done might not be enough in today's market with so many companies that have beautiful, amazing games that, like you're saying, have fully fleshed out tabletop simulator modules. It's just something to definitely
Yeah.
keep in mind. This is, like you said, this is not the Kickstarter of 6 or 7 years ago. This is a very different world, and you just have to go with it. You can
Yeah.
complain about it, you can fight against it, or you can just kind of go with it and work it to
What
your benefit.
I yeah, what I tried to do though, or what I ended up doing, right, is like I don't know, I think something more like 50%. I mean, that might be a little low. I mean, it depends on the type of game you're trying to make as well. Yeah, so if you're making like a tight like economic euro, like yeah, you want to have all the mechanics in place before you bring it to Kickstarter. Like you want that gameplay to be solid. Which is in terms of something like Frosthaven, where it's sort of a campaign thing, where you've got all this sort of extra content that you're creating on top of like the core gameplay mechanics. Yeah, I would say like not all of that has to be finished, um, but also because like it allows it to be a little flexible during the Kickstarter. Because your Kickstarter audience is a valuable resource. Like a lot of our playtesters have sort of come from that. But also, a lot of the updates, I'll show them like this is what we're designing right now. Like this is the new look for the character cards or the character mats or whatever we're working on, and we can get feedback directly from the community and sort of pivot or change based on that feedback. If like there's something our team didn't think about when they were designing that, somebody can point that out and be like, oh yeah, we can change that. So I think it's important that you're still able to sort of take the feedback of your community and work it into the design. Like it shouldn't be finished to the point that you aren't able to do that anymore.
Oh yeah, I completely agree on that. Something I'm doing for my game is I took some cues from the video game world, which often they'll come up with a demo. Like here's the first hour of gameplay, and just to see how the mechanisms work and understand maybe a little bit of the story, and here's what the art's going to look like. And so that's what I'm working on right now is creating a demo copy effectively of the game that I can send out to previewers and I can put out online that people can download and print off and play through at home, and just to say, hey, here's the first few hours of content. Here's how the game plays. Here's the mechanisms and how everything works. And if you like it, back it on Kickstarter because this is the first 4 hours, and the rest of the game is going to have X number of more hours that you can go through and all sorts of new surprises and new ways that the game is going to do stuff. But here's the core. Here's how it starts. Here's the opening of the story. And I'm hoping that that draws people in. If they get to experience the first little bit of it, first 5% of the game, and then they go, ooh, I can't wait to see the other 95% and how the story plays out, how the game changes and does interesting things. So I think we can also learn a lot from video games when it comes to these massive games with huge scope, with lots of scenarios and lots of legacy elements. Now,
Yeah,
is there
sure.
anything else you want to talk about from kind of the business side of things? The marketing, the project management, any of the kind of dollars and cents business side?
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate your point about audience. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that is eternal and like is helpful, for my Kickstarter 7 years ago, as much as it is for Kickstarters today. Is yeah, it's all about like cultivating and growing your audience and doing whatever you can to do that, whether it's through mailing lists or a website and a blog and whatever you're doing. Like yeah, you want to constantly be trying to build that audience and get people interested in what you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Isaac, this has been excellent. Closing thoughts. What would you tell someone? They're listening to this, they've got an idea for a massive game, a really big in scope game, but maybe they're a newer designer. Maybe they're just trying to figure this whole thing out. What would be some closing thoughts, maybe some best advice you would give to somebody listening?
Just go for it, man. uh like people can limit themselves like based on like what they think they can accomplish. um and if something seems too hard, they'll just kind of decide they can't do it. But I think, I don't know, I feel like somehow like I've got some weird thing in my brain that is always interested in like the bigger challenge. Like nothing is too hard. Like even though like some things like are impossible for me, like I don't realize they are, and I'll just keep doing it over and over, and I might fail. Like it might actually be impossible, but you got to just have that drive to just try things that you think are impossible, because sometimes they're not impossible, and you do it and it works out great.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, take the shot. You don't know
Yeah.
unless you take the shot, and so go for it and see what happens. Well, Isaac, this has been excellent. Where can people find you online?
So I spend a lot of time on Twitter, at Cephalofair on Twitter. We also have a website, cephalofair.com, where we recently launched our merch store, so you can go there and find all sorts of awesome Gloomhaven goodies. And we're also on Facebook at Cephalofair Games. So
Awesome. Well, Isaac, really appreciate your time. Really appreciate you coming on the show. Good luck with finishing up Frosthaven, getting it out into the world, and everything else you got going on right now.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for listening. Hosting for the Board Game Design Lab podcast is sponsored by Quartermaster Logistics, the leader in crowdfunding fulfillment and warehousing. Check them out at qmlogistics.com and find all sorts of game design resources, bonus material, and chances to win free games at boardgamedesignlab.com. And until next time, keep designing, keep playtesting, and keep creating great games. Did I mention keep playtesting?